You've seen blower cams marketed forever, but do they really make you more of a baller with Boost? Well, brace yourself for the facts, baby. On Engine Masters, we love challenging long-held beliefs about performance stuff. And one of those beliefs is that the market just has these special camshafts that are magical just for supercharged applications. They call them blower cams. You can find them in the catalog. And we're gonna find out on this episode if they really make a difference or not. And we're gonna do that by running this engine blown and unblown with a regular camshaft and with a so-called blower camshaft. I'll get into the specifics of those specs later on. But first, I'm really excited to tell you about a new member of the Engine Masters family. This is a 363 cubic inch small block Ford Windsor that is based on like Ford 302 architecture. Our short block is straight from Dart Machinery. They sell these things complete, all assembled, and they're killer. Forged pistons, good rods, forged crank, and the Dart SHP block that allows for a bigger bore than you could get from the factory on like a 302 Ford. The bore is 4.125 inches. The stroke is 3.4 inches. So put that all in that 8200 deck height and you get a little tiny powerhouse of 363 cubic inches. So that's the short block that we're working with here. And we're gonna configure it a whole bunch of ways in future episodes, but let's talk about what we're doing here. First of all, our supercharged combination is going to be stuffed by a ProCharger F1A 94 centrifugal blower that is going to make big power. Obviously, when we run it naturally aspirated, it's not going to have that supercharger. There's another difference blown for unblown, which is that we've got a Demon blow-through carburetor on it for the blower, and when we run it naturally aspirated, it's going to have a 750 CFM regular Holley XP. Everything else will remain the same throughout the test with the exception of the camshaft. So the intake manifold is going to be an Edelbrock single plane. It's a Super Victor 8.2. The cylinder heads are Airflow Research 165cc inlet runner. The compression ratio on this thing with these heads is going to be about 10.2 to 1. And as you can see, we've got the bottom end all filled out with some really nice oil pan stuff from Moroso. The headers are 1 3/4 inches. Now let's talk about the camshaft part of the program. And to do that, I want to sort of loosely define what would be considered a street cam versus a, quote, blower cam. And in doing that, I'm going to use specs that are typical of a comp cam's camshaft. It might be a little bit different on things like typical lobe separation angle for other manufacturers, but let's face it, nobody sells more camshafts than comp, and so they are kind of the standard from which to judge. They're also the brand that we're using here today and the company that helped us sort of sort through all of this. So what would be a typical comp cam's street strip camshaft? Let's say they have a lobe separation angle of 110 degrees. That's very common for them. What is lobe separation angle? Assume that's an exhaust lobe and this is an intake lobe, and the angle between the two is ground into the camshaft. The other thing about a typical split pattern cam from comp is that there's about a 6-degree difference between the duration of the intake lobe and the exhaust lobe. The exhaust lobe is almost always bigger. So for example, like a solid roller cam I recently ran in the COVID 350 was 242 degrees on the intake and 248 on the exhaust. So that split is about 6 degrees. Now let's get into what you would typically call a blower camshaft. There's some things people think of when they think blower camshaft, and the very first one is a wider lobe separation angle. Once again, if you've got your exhaust lobe and your intake lobe, and let's call that 110 degrees, they're gonna widen it out to 114. We'll get more into that in a minute. The other signature of a blower cam is going to be more exhaust duration, more of a split. So remember I talked about that difference between 242 and 248 for a street cam? That's a 6-degree split between intake and exhaust. And what you might see on a blower cam is more like a 10 to 14 degree split. So what are the thoughts behind this? Well, for the larger duration on the exhaust lobe, the thought is that the supercharger is cramming more air into the engine and therefore making more power, and so you're gonna have a lot more exhaust gases, and so the longer duration on the exhaust lobe is keeping that valve open longer, giving more of an opportunity to get all of those exhaust fumes back out of the engine in a way that might not be required so much with a naturally aspirated engine. So that's the thought on greater duration. What's the thought on lobe separation angle? And this is tricky. If you go back to an episode of Engine Masters that we did while we were testing various lobe separation angles, it's a little bit different than what you see with a blower cam. Try and visualize this. Once again, exhaust lobe, intake lobe, and there is a center line right between the two. There are multiple ways that you can change lobe separation angle. In our previous test, we took both lobes and moved them away from a center line when we were widening up that separation angle. But you don't have to do it that way. And what the blower cams do is actually just move the exhaust lobe. So in this case, we're gonna leave our intake lobe exactly where it is, and all we're going to do is advance that exhaust lobe by 3 degrees. So just the exhaust lobe is moving. So think of our blower cam test this way. The only thing that we are really testing here is the exhaust valve opening point happening much earlier. And then because the duration of the exhaust lobe is bigger, even the exhaust closing point is the same as it is on the naturally aspirated cam. So we're only testing that exhaust opening point and the longer duration of the exhaust side. That's the best way to look at this. The intake lobe is the same. The intake lobe is degreed in relation to the piston in the same place. All we're checking here for the blower is opening that exhaust valve earlier and keeping the exhaust valve open longer to get all that air out. Simple enough? Well, even if you don't get it, you're gonna see the results here, because what we've got are cams that are very typical of the specs I've been telling you for a street cam and a blower cam. And so let's get into those specs right now. Both of these camshafts are a design that you can put either a solid roller or a hydraulic roller on, strangely enough. Because you know us, you can guess that we've got solid roller lifters on both of these comp cams camshafts. The street cam has got duration on the intake of 244 and on the exhaust of 250. There's that 6-degree split that I told you about. And it's on a 110-degree lobe separation angle. Like I told you, typical street unit. Now the blower cam has a much bigger split. It's got that same 244 intake lobe, it's the same lobe, but it's got 258 on the exhaust, a big split there. And it's on a 113-degree lobe separation angle. If you care about lift, all of these lobes have right around 600 lift. It's like 603 to 605. And so this is gonna be really interesting. We've got a typical street cam, we've got a typical blower cam, and I'm gonna talk it out with the dudes, and then we're gonna hang our fresh 363 on the dyno and find out if any of this gobbledygook actually matters. Okay guys, I love episodes like this because we're either gonna myth bust or we're gonna prove that the long-held, bench racing story about the blower cam is true.
I mean, do you have any preconceived notions about the blower cam?
I've learned not to state my preconceived notions out loud, so even if I have them, I'm gonna say no.
Okay.
I've always had a preconceived notion.
That's right, I've just learned not to speak them.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I don't honestly recall ever having done this test back to back, so this is gonna be really good. I'm leaning towards maybe it not being magic because it's a blower cam, but that's why we're here.
Yeah, we'll find out. The data will prove it. Here's the one thing I really want to ask for the sake of the audience, though, is that the camshafts like this, or not like this is a naturally aspirated cam, but the blower cams that you see advertised very often are also stated that they're for nitrous. And my belief is that what we're testing here today cannot be extrapolated into whether this cam will work on nitrous or not. This is just a test for boost.
I don't think added cylinder pressure becomes a universal camshaft where you automatically add something or take something away just because it has more cylinder pressure. Compression ratio has more cylinder pressure.
Right.
And we don't change camshafts for added compression ratio necessarily. So I think it pertains just to the blowers.
Right, because I think it's all about the blower and how it's actually pushing. Nitrous doesn't push air and fuel through the engine, a blower does.
Well, I mean, nitrous may or may not need a different camshaft, but we're testing blowers,
Yeah,
and you
that's
just
it.
can't make that leap and say, oh, that applies to all these other things we're not testing here.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you also cannot extrapolate this for turbocharging. Once again, totally different game.
I think we've all learned not to presume or make assumptions.
Yes.
It's caught us
That's
too
the
many
one thing
times.
Engine Masters has done for us. So I just wanted to make that point really clearly for the audience, is that this is all about boost. I think it's fair to say that it works either centrifugal or roots supercharged, but it doesn't apply to nitrous, doesn't apply to turbocharging.
I agree.
Okay, so we're all in agreement. Perfect. Good way to start the day. Steve's gonna go fire this thing up right now. Our Ford 363 is naturally aspirated with the baseline regular guy camshaft.
On my way.
Go for it. Man, that's the first time I've seen the 363 in person. I like it.
I wanted to surprise you. I got to run it before, obviously, and it's really fun. It goes to 7,200 RPM, and there's more left. I mean, it'll rev higher if it were in a car and you wanted to shift later.
Right.
You know, every time we've used the start stuff, the Gladiator, 5,000 pulls on it. Very similar combination.
That's why I wanted
very
that short
similar
block.
power. Yeah.
Yeah,
Good stuff.
exactly.
And it sounded great going up there, too.
Dulcich loves the RPM.
Yeah.
Even he's jealous, huh?
I know. I think it's 10 horsepower down from what I had expected from it, but it's still pretty good. Let's have a look. There's the power numbers for our stout little Ford. It made 439 pound-feet of torque at 5,300 RPM and 514 horsepower at 6,900 RPM. So there's our baseline numbers, but let me bench race just a little bit with you guys. We've been super impressed with the AFR 165 Ford head before, but in those other engines that we've run it on, a 351 and a 410, I've had much smaller cams. So do you agree with me? The 195 would actually make more power on this particular combo.
I think it probably would. Maybe not
Yeah.
a lot, but this thing would drive great on the street because it's a little smaller port.
Yeah.
As far as a peak number, I think you're right. I think if it had the 195, we're probably looking at another 10 or something.
It's just I've spent so many episodes going, man, this 165 is amazing, just buy it. I think this is a case where the 195, especially with the blower, would probably behoove you.
Yeah, the blower kind of allows for a bigger cylinder head, but I think you were right every time you said that this 165 is an amazing little head.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's super good. And now we get to go put the supercharger on this combo.
All right.
Ready for that?
Sure.
More than ready.
We're gonna go install our Pro Charger, and this is really gonna get good. So we're changing the carburetor over to our blow-through Demon in order to prep for our Pro Charger. It's just calibrated differently, flows more fuel. It can handle the pressure and the airflow going through it in a different way than a regular carburetor. The blower we're installing here is a Pro Charger F1A94, capable of 1,200 horsepower, but we're not gonna make that much here. Need this out of here.
Gonna go to
To this one. We use zip ties as hose clamps to hold the little boost lines on, and it seems to work. So what Troy's doing here is disconnecting the carburetor lines, and we'll turn on the electric fuel pump and just pump all the fuel out of the system. We'll run the engine a little bit to get the fuel out of the bowls, and then we're ready to go with our Sunoco 116. All right, as soon as I hook up these fuel lines, we will be almost done. We've got our Pro Charger F1A94 on there. That thing is capable of more than 1,000 horsepower. As a matter of fact, I think we made almost 1,100 with it on my 347 Chevy. We've got it tuned down here. I don't know what this thing is gonna make. That's gonna be part of the fun. But since it is supercharged, I'm gonna be using the AMSOIL Dominator. You might not even be aware that because we haven't done the oil pour in a long time, AMSOIL is back as the title sponsor of Engine Masters, which is super cool. And when we run blown stuff, they like us to run the Dominator racing oil. AMSOIL, by the way, is the first synthetic oil, at least for hot rod and public consumption. Now we got a baseline we can live with.
Something we can live with.
Yeah, let's have a look. Our new power numbers are 715 horsepower up at 7,000 RPM, and we're making 590 pound-feet of torque. Now we've got our baseline naturally aspirated and boosted with our so-called naturally aspirated regular camshaft. It's time to go install the blower cam. Ready?
It's gonna make more horsepower.
Let's hope so. All right, Troy. Here's the thing about the 8.2 deck height small block Ford Windsor, meaning like a 260, 289, or a 302, or any of these stroker combos. You cannot get a roller lifter out of the block with the cylinder head installed. So we got to pull all the lifters up off the camshaft in order to get them out. And so Dulcich just came up with the genius idea of the wadded up shop towel to do that. Out with the normal cam, in with the blower cam. They look the same, but will they perform differently?
The key for me is to look right through the bolt hole and to hold it perfectly square and level. There we go.
Good. Blower cam installed. We're running it naturally aspirated now. We've got our regular carburetor back on the thing. We're ready to go look at what the power curves are gonna do. With our blower cam installed, our new peak power numbers are 436 pound-feet of torque at 5,300 RPM, and all the way up at 7,100 RPM, we got 519.7 horsepower. But that's not important right now. The whole story is going to be in comparing the blower cam curve to the regular cam curve.
Interesting.
The black cam on here is going to be the blower cam. The red lines represent the what we would call naturally aspirated or regular cam, and it looks to me like it did kind of what we expected when we did that test on lobe separation angle before, is that the wider lobe separation angle with more exhaust duration ends up favoring high RPM, but giving away torque at low RPM.
You know, we were talking earlier, and these quote blower cams are not that much different than some drag race grinds that have a lot more exhaust duration, wider lobe separation, and you know, it's fairly similar, and we've seen these results before.
Because it favors higher RPM?
Yes.
But why?
So what we're looking at, as far as the way the camshaft is ground and installed, the intake is in exactly the same place as far as intake closing and intake opening events, right? So all of the changes on the exhaust stroke, and the events happen earlier, it opens earlier and closes earlier. But does it close earlier? Not necessarily, because it's a larger lobe, so the closing point on the exhaust is pretty close.
Right.
So it's within half a degree as far as exhaust closing. So what's really happening is the exhaust valve is opening sooner, and it's opening at a higher pressure state in the cylinder. It'll impart more energy into the exhaust pipe, and it'll give you more of a draw when the reflective pressure wave moves up the primary tube and helps with the overlap scavenging.
So what you're saying is that the exhaust valve opens in the power stroke. So therefore, if it opens earlier, there's still more cylinder pressure when it opens. So there's more sort of like bang, getting it like moved out the exhaust.
Yeah, I mean, the term we would use for that is blow down. You're blowing it down earlier. And
I use bang.
well, bang's pretty good too. But I mean, that's what I really think is going on. Overlap scavenging is going to be improved up top, and you know, we see a little bit of gain in power.
But here's what's interesting to me about this whole thing, comparing it to the episode that we did on lobe separation angle, where we took both the lobes and moved them both out from the center line, whereas in this case, we're looking at no changes on the intake, basically the same overlap within maybe half a degree, and all the big changes happening in the exhaust, yet it's tilting the curve in the same way. Or, actually, you know what? I'm wrong. When we did the lobe separation angle test before, it gave up power everywhere, and the crossover was way up here.
Way up there, yeah.
The crossover here is further down than what we saw in our prior test. But that's also because on that other test, I think we went from like greater extremes.
Well, that's true, and also you're looking at the intake closing is going to affect trapping efficiency because you're having a later intake closing with that scenario that you just described in our lobe
by
separation
moving both
test.
lobes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Huh.
Interesting, though, isn't it?
Yeah. You know what else? You were also talking about how I was asking about what's really more important to power. Is it the so-called dynamic compression ratio, which is the compression ratio calculated from the intake closing point, or is what's more important the exhaust opening point and that blowdown of losing cylinder pressure on the power stroke? But your point is, at the bottom of that power stroke, the rod's swiping on a very ineffective area of the crankshaft.
Yeah, you're at a very poor rod angle as far as imparting torque onto the crankshaft. Plus, you've had a lot of pressure decay because of the expansion ratio from almost at TDC, where you have a very small volume, to almost bottom dead center, where, boom, you've used a lot of your effective pressure up.
So to go back to his time argument, which I also agree with, so how do you explain how it makes more bottom-end torque with the narrower lobe separation if it's ineffective at that point in the, if the exhaust opening is ineffective at the bottom of the power stroke?
Yeah, I was considering that, and it's not something that I just
Oh, come on!
I really don't have it, Freiberger. I mean,
you want to try?
It might be the time thing. I don't know.
It's apparent to me that this is not the easiest subject to make clear when we're discussing it.
But I think to clarify and narrow it down, this is a trend we typically see based on the change that we just saw. So what we need to find out is, does that make this a blower cam? And what's your definition of success on blower cam? Does it mean that the comparison of naturally aspirated to boost with the NA cam makes less power than the comparison of naturally aspirated to boost with the blower cam? In other words, if we gained, what would it be, roughly 200 horsepower with the NA cam, will this gain 220? Or will it gain the same amount and just tilt the curve in a different way?
I think we're going to see kind of the same thing happen with the blower as we are normally aspirated, kind of the same trends.
Improvement up top and a loss in torque right in the same area.
I mean, if we're going to qualify a, quote, blower cam as a winner, I think it has to make more power everywhere than the NA cam. That makes it a winner. No, I don't think it does. I think it does the same thing as this.
No, you're saying to qualify as a winner, it has to make more power everywhere.
Yeah.
The plot thickens. Okay.
Well, I mean, that's my take on it.
That's your take on it?
Because nobody, who said that you want all top end? Maybe you want more bottom end. Maybe you want more top end. You know, so that I think it does the same thing supercharged as normally aspirated.
This is a fantastic argument to have as soon as we actually have data.
I know, I'd like to see it.
So what we're going to do next is run in the dyno cell and put our Pro Charger back on the 363, and then there'll be less guessing and more knowing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what it does.
Point taken.
Let's go. All right, we decided it's the blower cam. So why are we even doing the episode? You just get the blower cam, it makes more power.
That's what you need is the blower cam.
Yeah.
When you got a blower, for crying out loud.
Data me. Por favor. You know I'm obligated to give you the power peaks, even though you know the whole story is in the curves. Now we're making 592.5 pound-feet of torque and a peak of 729 horsepower under boost. But, like I always say, the whole story is in the overlay.
It is.
The way I worked that into sort of a rhyme.
Oh, yeah.
I could be the new horsepower rapper.
If you could just hold a tune, yeah.
Right, there you go. Tells you what it tells you, doesn't it? So the red lines right here are with the naturally aspirated cam. The black lines are with the blower cam. And what you'll observe is the trend is exactly what we saw when it was naturally aspirated. Meaning specifically that the so-called regular cam with 110-degree lobe separation angle makes more torque and power all the way up to the crossover at 5252, which is 5,252 RPM. And then above that, the so-called blower cam with the 113-degree lobe separation angle pulls ahead. So the question is it a blower cam?
It's a cam.
It's a cam.
I call it a blower cam.
Why?
Well, look, it made more power with the blower.
It made more power naturally aspirated.
So it must
Well,
be
it
a
did.
naturally aspirated cam.
Right.
Or a blower cam.
Or a blower cam. So I got to go back to the Richard Holdner thing. He's made this famous, actually, which is all cams are blower cams, which means, I think, in this literal example, that you pick the shape of the curve that you want naturally aspirated, and the same thing happens with boost.
Well, I'm going to take the opposite position of that and say all cams are NA cams.
They are. All cams are NA cams, too. It's just you pick what you want them to do.
Our blower cam is the same camshaft we pick for drag race stuff with wide lobe set, more exhaust, and all of that. So,
Well, if you want to reduce it all down, then you could just say all cams are cams, right?
All cams are cams.
that may be the ultimate answer.
They
right
might
there.
be nitrous cams too. I think what we've seen over and over is that the shape of the curve and how it affects performance is what the camshaft's going to do, regardless of if it's naturally aspirated or boosted, right?
I don't see this really as being any different than any other cam test where you choose the cam based on where and what you want the engine to do.
Yeah.
My takeaway is the cams, the two different cams did the same thing, whether it was normally aspirated or blown. You're seeing the same tilt of the curve, so
Yep.
it's the cam and the engine combination. Maybe it doesn't really care that much that it's a blower cam.
If I was drag racing, I would have picked the so-called blower cam even for naturally aspirated trim.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're running the thing from 6 to 7,500, that's the camshaft.
Yeah.
If you're running the thing from 3,500 to 5,000, then the NA cam is the camshaft, whether it's NA or blown.
Can we call up the two naturally aspirated curves just so that we can have some look at...
Separate from this or blown?
No, let's add it so that
Okay.
we can compare the shapes of them. Because I think what we're going to see is they diverge at the top as the boost increases, but I just want to have a look at that. Because the other thing that this is going to demonstrate is that whether it's blown or naturally aspirated, the effect on the curves is the same. In other words, the blower cam doesn't magically all of a sudden outperform the regular cam in every way just because it's under boost. So the last thing that we're looking at here is a screen that has got 2 or 4 complete tests here. At the top half, everything under boost, regular cam and blower cam. At the bottom, everything naturally aspirated, and in this case, red is the blower cam, green is the regular cam. You can see that the shapes of the curves are the same, although I'm seeing a greater difference here than I am here. So what I'm seeing in these two graphs in summary is that the trend of the camshaft naturally aspirated is the same trend as the camshaft with the blower on it. Once again, the blower cam is not magically making another 30 horsepower than the regular cam once it's under boost. And I think that's the impression a lot of people have.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, gents, get to the point.
The takeaway?
Final conclusion.
Brûlé. Your takeaway.
They do the same thing, NA as they do blown.
Yep. Cams are cams.
Cams are cams.
And here's the ultimate thing, which I know that you know, so I will let you speak it from my brain.
Oh, no. Oh, man. I wouldn't change cam for that much difference, really, when I could just add, what, 3/4 of a pound of boost and
Exactly.
eclipse all of those differences?
Right, if you care about the tilting of the curve, big deal. You're like, ooh, I don't make enough horsepower, let me put another pound in it. Guess what? It's gonna bring this one up to here anyway. Boost is boost.
Cams are cams.
It just doesn't matter. So still, I learned something here, which is cams are cams, but I think we also learned that boost, just keep cranking it up and you make more power. More power. That's what we do every single time on Engine Masters. See, I'm not taking any advice from you on the silicone because you do the dab technique.
That's bad.
You can't have the dab technique.
So David, when you actually drop that intake manifold on, you want it in the right position fore and aft so you don't kick the
Slide it.
silicone,
Thanks,
you know, from out of position.
Okay.
Yeah, so it just captures that silicone.
Do you want?
Hey,
Oh, Brule just put his hand right into your silicone job.